Hello, Jamie from Inky&Scrappy, sharing with you today how to heat emboss. So heat embossing usually involves a heat tool, some embossing powder, some special inks that are going to make that embossing powder stick to your stamped image, and then of course, you know, stamps and embossing powder. Did I say embossing powder already? There's multiple different kinds of embossing powder, so keep that in mind. A reverse tweezer comes in really handy, especially when you're doing smaller things to emboss and it gets hot. If you don't want to if you want to try it and you don't want to invest in a heat gun yet, I totally understand. I started out embossing on, I'm not gonna lie, a toaster. Like the side of a metal toaster gets hot, and so you could put your thing on there and it would get hot enough. You can also do it over the stovetop. I wouldn't suggest it, but it's something that you could do with an electric style stove. Anything that's going to get a little hot. I would say my air fryer would probably get hot enough on the top of it to melt embossing powder onto paper if I put it on the top of it. I'm not suggesting you do that, but if you wanted to try it without a lot of cost input, that would be one way to try it. I know, it is what it is, right? So the other thing to have, if you can get one of these, they're kind of nice. If you love embossing, it's not something you need right away. A piece of paper works wonderfully. I'm just doing a lot of embossing right now because I'm working on card class prep, and so it's just easier to use this for that. So if you do mass create cards and you do a lot of embossing, this is kind of nice. I only use this when I'm doing a bunch of the same thing all at once. Usually I just do paper. Or the other thing is buying a cheap container like this for like your clear embossing powder. I think I have my clear embossing powder, white embossing powder. I think I have silver and gold in containers like this with a little spoon in. It just makes it a little bit easier for me. So that being said, let's talk inks. So inks, for the most part, you either need a VersaMark, which is going to be a clear ink that will allow the embossing powder to stick to it. The other option is a VersaFine Onyx Black. So anything that's pigment ink would work. I mean, you could do brown, you could do, VersaFine comes in multiple of colors. But basically you want something that's going to have a pigment ink in it. You can emboss with Distress Oxide inks, but you have to be quicker because it's a dye pigment fusion, so it's only gonna, it stays wet not quite as long as a regular pigment would stay wet. The other thing that you probably are going to want is a powder tool of some sort. I have the Tailored Expression powder tool, a anti-static, like, I'm trying to think, like a powder bag would work. I've made my own with an old like a cloth camera case, like for glasses, and you just put some powder, like baby powder, in there will work. It's not the preferred method, but it works. And you know, if you're just trying it and you don't know if you're gonna like it or not. Today I'm gonna emboss with the Nuvo embossing powder, which this one is Pearl Luster. So there's some, it's kind of a creamish color with some glitter in it. That's what I'm using today, but there's many different ones out there, many different companies, many different brands, I have a whole drawer. You know, Nanny was getting rid of a whole bunch, and so I had grabbed some of the older ones. I don't think emboss as nice as some of the newer ones. Maybe it's just because they age. I really don't know any of that. But so this one's like a glow in the dark one from Lawn Fawn, Tim Holtz, and so this one's going to be the glow in the dark one, see-through. So it's more like a transparent embossing powder, as is Tim Holtz's Distress line is an embossing glaze, so you can actually see through it. So if you have technique stuff, glazes are nice, so you can still see like print through them, those types of things. So keep that in mind when picking one. Granted, if you're going to emboss this over clear, it's going to look purple on a white piece of paper, so keep that in mind. It's not going to show up very good on a black or a dark piece of paper. They also have puff powder paper, or puff powder embossing powders to kind of look like marshmallows or cloudy stuff. There's many different varieties and kinds out there. My go-to usually is the embossing powder, the clear embossing powder from Ranger. I think this one's fine. They might have an ultra fine, which works better, but you know, this one Nanny was getting rid of, so I grabbed it. And it works good for what I need. It's not, I think there's a fine one that works better for smaller, intricate designs, if that makes sense. You know, because it's basically plastic and you're melting it onto paper. I hope that makes sense. But to start, so for me, because I'm using a smaller piece, granted you can do this on a big piece of paper and die cut it later, because I'm doing this for a class project, or you know, for my class kits, I like to do it this way. So I kind of use this as my guide. If you use die cuts for banner type stuff, let's see, I do have somewhere, I have one that I put in here that has my different banner dies that I use frequently, and so then I can just lay it in there. But it just makes it easier for lining up the sentiment over the top. So let me show you. So this is what it's going to say, but by putting it here, I can take this one out, so I can actually line up my letters in here before I get to stamping, and then I can see where they're going to be. This is because my piece is already pre-cut. If it was not pre-cut, you could just stamp it on there and then of course go back and line up your die cut later if that's how you're doing it, or put it on your paper cutter and cut your strip that way. So I'm going to pop this in here. I actually have some removable tack glue runner on the back side to help hold it in, just because there's very little room on both sides of this one to put the magnet on there. But I am going to have the magnet on that top piece so it holds this piece in place, which is basically holding my piece in place here. So to start, I'm just going to go over it with that embossing powder tool. If you have the other kind, that works too. Let me grab one of the other ones. This one is, I think, EK Successes, and it has a little brush on top. It's not, I don't know, it takes a little bit longer to cover a larger area. I'm really liking the Tailored Expression one. I know Rabbit Hole Design has one that looks really nice too. I haven't tried it, so I cannot tell you one way or the other if it's, you know, I've heard good things. So we'll say that. So for this one, I have it all in there. I have it lined up. I'm just going to tap it with the VersaMark ink. Set this down and just kind of lightly tap over the top of it. I don't want to do like a hard push because it'll make your letters not as, I don't know, crisp, I guess. It kind of just spreads that out, especially if they're finer letters. You'll get more of a blotchy look to them, I guess. Let me see if I can find the one I messed up on. So I didn't have the magnet in there for my first go, and yes, you see that it kind of has like this, it shifted a little bit because I did a double impression. I don't think, you know, you can see, I don't know if you can see it on camera, but you can kind of see that it kind of leaves an impression behind. And as long as it looks like it's all full, you should be good to go. You can double stamp, just make sure that your paper does not move, otherwise you will get what I got on my first one. I was like, what? I mean, it's still readable. I'll probably use it for my project because it's not perfect. So for this one, you kind of want to heat up your heat tool a little bit before you bring it to paper. Heating it from the back side will help, especially if you aren't very fast from one to the next. It kind of helps it stick to the paper. And then slowly going over the top, and you can see it change as you're doing this. I like to look and make sure that it's all kind of glossy. If you overheat it, it tends to get matte, but there are also some matte ones out there, so keep that in mind. And so once I am done, it is going to look like this. I wasn't very fast with it, so it didn't stick as good as my other ones had. But so that's kind of what you get. So the first one here, I wasn't very fast, or my second one here, I wasn't very fast with it, so you can see it's not quite as dark as the one that I did previous, but they both turned out fairly well. So that's one option for you if you are looking at adding embossing to your repertoire. Start slow, start with some basics. So your clear embossing powder is probably your most versatile. If you're going to do a lot of VersaFine Onyx Black stamping, that's my go-to. I love the look of white on dark cardstock. So VersaMark and a good white embossing powder. I like Brutus Monroe's Alabaster White, works really good. For me at least. I think Ranger has look for a fine white embossing powder. It's going to work better for most all of your text style stamping. So the other thing you can do with the VersaFine Onyx Black and clear embossing powder is you can stamp your image that you're going to color, and it will create wells for watercoloring, and that works very well to keep your colors from running into each other if that's something that you struggle with and you want to try something else and you like watercoloring as a medium. So that's all I have for today. I hope it was, you know, informative. If you have any questions, please ask away. I will try to answer them as soon as I get them, and I find, you know, it depends on the day and prevailing wind, but usually I get back to questions fairly quickly. So anyways, have an amazing rest of your day. Bye.